I'm an American living in Moscow, Russia, and this will be my first time watching the Tucker Putin interview. Welcome to Expat American. I am the Expat American. Some people have requested that I do this. I have a unique perspective. I lived in Florida, New York, and California while I was in America for most of my life. And then I moved to Moscow 8 days before the special military operation. So I have a unique perspective as an American who has been living in Russia during this new Cold War. So let's get started, and I'll give my commentary and we'll see what I think of it. It's a tough spot for both these guys to be in. It's like an Olympic competition. You know, no matter how powerful you are on camera, you're on the edge of your seat, and you have to be careful with what you say. And, you know, words matter. And yeah, this is like watching a live sport event. It's a tense conversation for sure.
Mr. President, thank you. On February 22nd, 2022, you addressed your country in a nationwide address when the conflict in Ukraine started. And you said that you were acting because you had come to the conclusion that the United States, through Nato, might initiate a, quote, surprise attack on our country. And to American ears, that sounds paranoid. Tell us why you believe the United States might strike Russia out of the blue. How did you conclude that?
It's not that America, the United States, was going to launch a surprise strike on Russia. I didn't say that. Are we having a talk show or a serious conversation?
Here's the quote. Thank you. It's a formidable series.
Because you're...
That's what's cool about Putin that I've noticed, because I watched the Oliver Stone interviews, which is why I'm excited this is coming out, because I don't feel like the Oliver Stone interviews became a cultural phenomenon that everyone watched. But whereas Tucker, whether you like him or not, he is super popular right now. So it is great that he's interviewing Putin, because it's going to bring light to this whole issue, regardless of what you think about it. And what I noticed in watching the Oliver Stone interviews is that Putin has what I would call a healthy sense of humor, and he's able to use it to diffuse situations and also to solve problems.
Eastern Christianity. From this time, the centralized Russian state began to strengthen. Why? Because of the single territory, integrated economic ties, one and the same language, and, after the baptism of Russia, the same faith and rule of the prince.
See, that's an important distinction too. Putin said orthodoxy, and then he went on to say Eastern Christianity, because he knows he's talking to a Western audience, many of which might not know exactly what orthodoxy is, and he wants to let them know this is not a fringe thing. This is a Jesus-believing religion. It's an important distinction, but it's a little distinction where he knows his audience.
In 1862, Russia celebrated the 1000th anniversary of its statehood. And in Novgorod, there is a memorial dedicated to the 1000th anniversary of the country. In 882, Rurik's successor, Prince Oleg, who was actually playing the role of regent at Rurik's younger son, because Rurik had died by that time, came to Kiev. He ousted two brothers who apparently had once been members of Rurik's squad. So Russia began to develop with two centers of power, Kiev and Novgorod. The next very significant date in the history of Russia was 988. This was the baptism of Russia, when...
So I have been trying to be careful not to spoil this, but I have been seeing little messages here and there amongst friends, and I heard that Putin gave a history lesson for about 30 minutes. And I can tell by the look on Tucker's face right now, he's starting to think, oh my gosh, how long is this story going to be? Because I know what it's like when you're interviewing people. And some people are really good at interviewing. They know that they have to give an answer that gets to the point. And then other people, they just they don't know it, and they just go on and on and on. I think Putin does know it. I don't think he's just going on purpose. I think that he has to make this point. He has to explain Russian history to a Western audience because I think they are not taught that. Whereas the reverse does happen. Russians are taught about Western history from all these different Western countries. But I think by and large, the average Westerner doesn't really know Russian history. And unfortunately, Putin has to explain it now.
Hitler had nothing to do but start implementing his plans with Poland. By the way, the USSR, I have read...
I just have a thought here. I mean, think about this. This is a lot of information that Putin is giving. So whatever you think of him, he is not just a power-hungry, crazy, selfish person. This guy knows a lot. This is a lot of information that he's just saying, just talking and talking and talking and giving all this history. It's just a, interesting thing. And I can tell that they're starting to get on each other's nerves a little bit.
So that you don't think that I'm inventing things, I'll give you these documents.
Well, it doesn't sound like you're inventing it. I'm not sure why it's relevant to what happened 2 years ago.
But still, these are documents from the archives.
See, Putin, he has to do this. He has to explain it. And I know Tucker, because he said in his interview, his intro, that he already understands now what Putin was doing. But it's a little bit funny to see him, Tucker, because he's a good entertainer. It's fun to see him squirm a little bit and try and regain control of the interview.
Try to entrench the idea that this population was not exactly Russians, that because they lived on the fringe, they were Ukrainians. Originally, the word Ukrainian meant that the person was living on the outskirts of the state, along the fringes, or was engaged in a border patrol service. It didn't mean any particular ethnic group. So the
I've heard this definition of Ukraine a lot before, that it just means, the territory on the edge.
For some inexplicable reason, Lenin, the founder of the Soviet state, insisted that they be entitled to withdraw from the USSR. And again, for some unknown reasons, he transferred to that newly established Soviet Republic of Ukraine some of the lands together with people living there, even though those lands had never been called Ukraine, and yet they were made part of that Soviet Republic of Ukraine. Those lands included the Black Sea region, which was received under Catherine the Great, and which had no historical connection with Ukraine whatsoever.
Okay, so I don't know about that, and that's interesting, and it sounds to me like he does not know why Lenin did that. And if you know, leave a comment. I'm curious, because what it sounds like to me as an outsider, as an American who was not raised learning this history, Putin is not in agreement with some of the things Lenin did.
In 1654.
Exactly.
You obviously have encyclopedic knowledge of this region, but why didn't you make this case for the first 22 years as president that Ukraine wasn't a real country?
And that is a fair question for a Westerner that does not know anything about Russian history.
This involved promoting national languages and national cultures, which is not a bad in principle. That is how the Soviet Ukraine was created. After the World War II, Ukraine received, in addition to the lands that had belonged to Poland before the war, part of the lands that had previously belonged to Hungary and Romania. So Romania and Hungary had some of their...
So is the idea, guys, that Russia, the Soviet Union at that time, was trying to encourage each one of their republics to have its own culture and perhaps its own language? And if so, why? I'm not saying that's right or wrong, I'm just curious, because I know that what it's looking like nowadays is, because I grew up being told America is multicultural and it's a melting pot, so we're going to push all the cultures, we're going to blend them together. And the idea being that I'm learning now, that I'm gathering from people, is that Russia is also multicultural, but they're not trying to push the cultures together, they're distinct cultures.
Hungary has a right to take its land back from Ukraine, and that other nations have a right to go back to their 1654 borders?
I'm not sure whether they should go back to the 1654 borders. But given Stalin's time, so-called Stalin's regime, which, as many claim, saw numerous violations of human rights and violations of the rights of other states, One may say that they could claim back those lands of theirs while having no right to do that. It is at least understandable.
Have you told Viktor Orban that he can have part of Ukraine?
Never. I have never told him, not a single time.
That is a hard question for him to ask. But the thing is, a large part of the audience is going to be thinking that. And if Tucker doesn't ask it, then he's going to get heck for not asking it.
But many nations feel frustrated by the redrawn borders of the wars of the 20th century and wars going back 1,000 years, the ones that you mentioned. But the fact is that you didn't make this case in public until 2 years ago, February. And in the case that you made, which I read today, you explain at great length that you felt a physical threat from the West in NATO, including potentially a nuclear threat. And that's what got you to move. Is that a fair characterization of what you said?
I understand that my long speeches probably fall outside of the genre of the interview. That is why I asked you at the beginning, are we going to have a serious talk or a show? You said a serious talk. So bear with me, please. We're coming to the point.
You know what's cool? Again, I mean, Putin is not afraid to show how he feels and to just look like a real person, a real man on camera in the public eye, and I appreciate that. That's why I thought it was a pity that not a lot of people saw the Oliver Stone interview. And I'm grateful that a lot of people are watching this interview because I think most Westerners, they see his picture and they hear that he's bad, but they don't ever really look him in the eye. And it's going to be hard for people to get through this interview and not at least understand that he is, you know, a living, breathing, normal person with emotions.
China's potential is enormous. It is the biggest economy in the world today in terms of purchasing power parity and the size of the economy. It has already overtaken the United States quite a long time ago, and it is growing at a rapid clip. Let's not talk about who is afraid of whom. Let's not reason in such terms. And let's get into the fact that after 1991, when Russia expected that it would be welcomed into the brotherly family of civilized nations, nothing like this happened. You tricked us. I don't mean you personally when I say you.
And see, that's exactly my point, is that Russia, Putin, the Russian government then, now, they felt like everything was going to get better and everyone would be on the same team, and they feel like they were tricked.
Before that, Yeltsin came to the United States. Remember, he spoke in Congress and said the good words. God bless America. Everything he said were signals. Let us in. Remember the developments in Yugoslavia before the Yeltsin was lavished with praise? As soon as the developments in Yugoslavia started, he raised his voice.
So I'm trying not to give my opinion here because I want you to make up your own. Also, I have to be careful of the algorithm. But let's just say, so if what he's saying is true, that's very sad.
It was the United States that let the genie out of the bottle. Moreover, when Russia protested and expressed its resentment, what was said? The UN Charter.
So you see there, because a lot of people say, you know, Putin, Russia, they invaded 2 years ago. But the way they see it, this started a long time before 2 years ago.
At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, you know, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, you know, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now. You can ask him.
So if that is true, that's kind of scary because it sounds like the President of the United States is not really the President of the United States.
Were you
It's
sincere?
impossible now.
Would you have joined NATO?
Look, I asked the question, is it possible or not? And the answer I got was no. If I was insincere in my desire to find out what the leadership position was,
But if he had said yes, would you have joined NATO?
if he had said yes, the process of rapprochement would have commenced, and eventually it might have happened if we had seen some sincere wish on the other side of our partners. But it didn't happen. Well, no means no. Okay.
So see, he can't answer that. He can't say, well, yeah, of course we would have, because there's a lot of factors at play. But he asks, is it possible if the U.S. said yes, then a negotiation would start to take place, and maybe a deal would be worked out, maybe it would not.
I know you're clearly bitter about it. I understand. But why do you think the West rebuffed you then? Why the hostility? Why did the end of the Cold War not fix the relationship? What motivates this from your point of view?
You said I was bitter about the answer. No, it's not bitterness. It's just a statement of fact. We're not bride and groom, bitterness, resentment. It's not about those kind of matters in such circumstances. We just realized we weren't welcome there, that's all. Okay, fine. But let's build...
I'm glad he corrected him on that, because I was also thinking, I don't think he's bitter. I mean, he might be disappointed. He might even be sad. But yeah, if I were Putin, I wouldn't have wanted to be classified as bitter for that.
If NATO expands, everything would be just the same as during the Cold War, only closer to Russia's borders. That's all. He was a white...
So this is an important distinction. If you aren't aware, this is, I think I'm led to believe one of the most important things for Putin is that he says basically, the USSR voluntarily collapsed, and they were thinking that Russia, I believe, was going to join the Western world. And then NATO was formed, which would not include Russia. And so Russia kind of felt like, well, what's the problem? Why can't we join? And so it was almost as if NATO was setting Russia up to look like the bad guy.
But they're struggling to understand how to do it. They have driven the situation to the point where we are at. It is not us who have done that. It is our partners, opponents who have done that. Well, now let them think how...
I like how he often politely called America and the West our partners. And he did that a lot in the Oliver Stone interview. He's doing it now here too. So he's trying to be gracious.
So twice you've described U.S. presidents making decisions and then being undercut by their agency heads. So it sounds like you're describing a system that's not run by the people who were elected in your telling.
That's right. That's right.
That's exactly what I was saying, is that according to what Putin's saying, it sounds like the presidents are not really the presidents.
They said, well, it's not enshrined on paper, so we'll expand. So there were 5 waves of expansion, the Baltic states, the whole of Eastern Europe, and so on. And now I come to the...
And this is important if you're confused about Putin and you don't understand and you're thinking, oh my gosh, he invaded another country. The way they see it is NATO has expanded towards them 5 times, a group of nations that are united, that they are not allowed to be a part of, that are coming closer and closer and closer to their borders.
With the backing of CIA, of course. The organization you wanted to join back in the day, as I understand. We should thank God they didn't let you in.
So what he is saying, what Putin is saying, is that the CIA manipulated Ukraine into becoming pro-Western and against Russia.
So in 2008, the doors of NATO were open for Ukraine. In 2014, there was a coup. They started persecuting those who did not accept the coup, and it was indeed a coup. They created a threat to Crimea, which we had to take under our protection. They launched the war in Donbass in 2014 with the use of aircraft and artillery against civilians. This is when it all started. There is a video of aircraft attacking Donetsk from above. They launched a large-scale military operation, then another one. When they failed, they started to prepare the next one. All this against the background of military development of this territory and opening of NATO's doors. How could we not express concern over what was happening? From our...
Okay, so he's saying that Donetsk, so I guess like a city in Ukraine, was under attack, a civilian area, by the Ukrainian government. And his position is Russia had to come in and help, and Russia had to, take these areas eventually.
They indeed signed the Minsk agreements, but they never intended to implement them. They simply led us by the nose.
Was there anyone for you to talk to? Did you call a U.S. President, Secretary of State, and say, if you keep militarizing Ukraine with NATO forces, this is going to be we're going to act?
Мы постоянно об этом говорим. Мы постоянно об этом говорим. Мы обращались
We talked about this all the time. We addressed the United States and European countries' leadership to stop these developments immediately, to implement the Minsk agreements. Frankly speaking,
So look it up if you're curious, the Minsk agreements, which he says that, I think he said France, Germany, and Poland did not help to uphold. And he kept warning that since you guys aren't going by this, things are going to get worse.
it was they who started the war in 2014. Our goal is to stop this war. And we did not start this war in 2022. This is an attempt to stop it.
Do you think you've stopped it now?
Okay, so in case you don't know his distinction, what he's saying is in 2014, the Ukrainian government went to war against a city or a territory in Ukraine. And Russia's position, Putin's position, the Russian government position is that these are Russian people, Russian-speaking people mixed in with Ukrainians. They are their Orthodox brothers. They are part of the former Soviet republics. And they cannot just sit by and let, in their minds, which could be true, a government, the Ukrainian government, which is now under the control of the West, they think, that is now killing people.
Bandera, Shukevich. It was those people who were made national heroes. That is the problem. And we are constantly told that nationalism and neo-Nazism exist in other countries as well. Yes, they are seedlings, but we uproot them, and other countries fight against them. But Ukraine is not the case. These people have been made into national heroes in Ukraine. Monuments to those people have been erected. They are displayed on flags. Their names are shouted by crowds that walk with torches, as it was in Nazi Germany. These were people who exterminated Poles, Jews, and Russians.
Это люди, которые уничтожали поляков, евреев и русских.
It is necessary to stop this practice and prevent the dissemination of this concept.
So I hear about this a lot, Nazis in Ukraine, and the West doesn't seem to know about it.
This becoming a global war or a nuclear conflict?
At least that's what they're talking about. And they're trying to intimidate their own population with an imaginary Russian threat. This is an obvious fact. And thinking people, not Philistines, but thinking people, analysts, those who are engaged in real politics, just smart people, understand perfectly well that this is a fake. They're trying to...
So you see that? He said Philistines. So he's using biblical terms here.
Russian invasion of Poland, Latvia, expansionist behavior. Can you imagine a scenario where you sent Russian troops to Poland?
Only in one case, if Poland attacks Russia. Why? Because we have no interest in Poland, Latvia, or anywhere else. Why would we do that? We simply don't have any interest. It's just threat-mongering.
Well, the argument, I know you know this, is that, well, he invaded Ukraine. He has territorial aims across the continent, and you're saying unequivocally you don't.
It is absolutely out of the question. You just don't have to be any kind of analyst. It goes against common sense to get involved in some kind of a global war. And a global war will bring all humanity to the brink of destruction. It's obvious.
So Tucker is pushing him and asking him if he's an expansionist. Is he going to win in Ukraine, let's say, and then move on to Poland and other countries? And he's saying, what would be the benefit? Why would I do that? But what's interesting, what I'm thinking of is, Putin is being grilled on whether or not he's an expansionist. While NATO, it appears, continues to expand. For some people, it may look like Putin is not the one expanding. It's the other side that's expanding.
Do the United States need this? What for?
национальной территории. У вас нечем заниматься.
Thousands of miles away from your national territory.
Границы полны. Проблемы с
Don't you have anything better to do?
государством.
You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine?
Понимая ситуацию, которая складывается.
Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia? Make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end?
Здравому смыслу.
And realizing this, actually return to common sense, start respecting our country and its interests, and look for certain solutions.
Это гораздо умнее.
It seems to me that this is much smarter and more rational.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, do you have? I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
У вас лично, может быть, есть алиби. У вас лично.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
You see, again, Putin, there's his sense of humor in a very serious situation, but he's able to diffuse the situation.
Did you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
Вы знаете, я не
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities. Because there may be many people interested, but not all of them are capable of sinking to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and carrying out this explosion. These two components should be connected. Who is interested and who is capable of doing it?
But I'm confused. I mean, that's the biggest act of industrial terrorism ever, and it's the largest emission of CO2 in history. Okay, so if you had evidence, and presumably given your security services or intel services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West did this, why wouldn't you present it and win a propaganda victory?
В войне пропаганды очень сложно.
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States, because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media. The ultimate beneficiary of the biggest European media are American financial institutions. Don't you know that? So it is possible to get involved in this work, but it is cost prohibitive, so to speak. We can simply shine the spotlight on our sources of information, and we will not achieve results. It is clear to the whole world what happened, and even American analysts talk about it directly. It's true.
Yes, but here's a question you may be able to answer. You worked in Germany, famously. The Germans clearly know that their NATO partner did this, and it damaged their economy greatly. It may never recover. Why are they being silent about it? That's very confusing to me. Why wouldn't the Germans say something about it?
Ну, меня это тоже удивляет.
This also confuses me. President of Ukraine issued a decree prohibiting negotiations with us.
Ну пусть он отменит.
Let him cancel that
Мы же не
decree,
отказывались.
and that's it.
Вот нам всё
We have
это
never refused
говорят.
negotiations,
Да мы
indeed.
не отказывались.
We hear all the time, is Russia ready?
Лично отказали.
Yes, we have not refused. It was them who publicly refused.
Вступайте в переговоры.
Well, let him cancel his decree and enter into negotiations, since it is impossible to ensure a normal future for our children and our families unless we ensure a normal, sustainable future for the entire country, for the motherland.
Устойчивое будущее для всей страны.
That is why patriotic sentiment is so strong in Russia.
So he's talking about traditional family values and talking about Russia as a family, which is encouraging for me to hear since I'm raising a family of 5 kids here.
Ukrainian soldiers got encircled. This is an example from real life.
Украинская
Our soldiers were shouting to them, "There is no chance. Surrender yourselves. Come out and you will be alive."
наши солдаты им кричат.
Suddenly, the Ukrainian soldiers were screaming from there in Russian, perfect Russian, saying, "Russians, do not surrender." And all of them
И
perished.
не сдаются.
They still identify themselves as Russian.
Они до сих пор русскими себя ощущают. В этом смысле то, что
What is happening is, to a certain extent,
That is chilling. That is a chilling story. And it definitely makes it sound more like a civil war.
why are the Ukrainian authorities dismantling the Ukrainian Orthodox Church?
русскую православную церковь.
because it brings together not only the territory, it brings together our souls. No one will be able to separate the soul. Shall we end here, or is there anything else?
No, I think that's great.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, that's that. So, it's the end of my first time watching video. Anyway, what is it called? I don't know. It's my first time doing it, guys, so I don't know. But I hope you guys like that. Hope you like the commentary. Hope it made sense. Hopefully it's making me smarter doing these things. If you are new to, learning about Russia because of Tucker's interview and you just stumbled upon this channel, I have a Russian wife. I live in Moscow. I came here 8 days before the special military operation. I've got 5 kids, and I have this YouTube channel. And we don't normally do things like this, but the channel is trying to bridge the gap between the West and Russia. And so, this was a hot topic for our channel because this interview touches on what our channel is touching on. And we are doing 10 to 30-minute videos going around Moscow, going around Russia, filming, and just showing real life of real people on the street. So click like, subscribe, click the box, check out some of our videos, and learn a little more about Russia.